Welcome back, horror fans. It's been a while, but we're back with another comprehensive list of horror games. This time, we're seeing what the Game Boy Color has to offer. Throughout the list, we'll be looking at games only available for the GBC, as well as some homebrew games and some fan-made demakes. Now, there's actually quite a bit to cover, so without any further ado, let's kick back and have a look at the weird world of handheld horror on the Game Boy Color.
Imagine a world of color for each and every Game Boy game. New Game Boy Color. Escape to color.
Up first, we have Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This action horror beat-em-up was released in the year 2000 and was created by a developer called Game Brains. Similar to the version on the Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Color game is based on the popular TV series of the same name and takes place during the 4th season. Make no mistake though, the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance titles are completely different games, with different stories, gameplay, and characters. Each level starts off with an animated cutscene, where we get to see Buffy interacting with other characters from the TV show. These animations aren't anything too special, but they do help to create an immersive story that will help to engage the player, and overall, they really do add to the entire experience. As Buffy, you must battle your way through 8 action-packed levels. Gameplay consists of standard side-scrolling, where you will have numerous one-on-one battles with vampires. You must weaken your enemies first by beating them up, but to actually kill a vampire, you must drive a stake through their heart. To make battles faster, you can simply trip the vampires with a sweeping leg kick and stake them on the ground. At the end of each level, you must then face a stage boss, although these so-called bosses are usually just more vampires that are almost always very easy to beat. Throughout the game, you will visit different locations in Sunnyvale, including the cemetery, the school, and even the Sunnyvale Zoo. Some levels will have some platforming elements, but you'll never have to worry about dying if you miss a ledge, which is definitely a relief, as the jumping mechanics in this game are extremely clunky. All in all, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is an okay game. It's probably not one that I'd recommend to the casual gamer, but if you're a horror fan or someone that loved the TV show like myself, then this game is definitely worth checking out. Personally, it's one of my favorite games for the Game Boy Color. If anyone's interested in checking it out, a loose copy on PriceStarting.com is worth only $14. Next up, we have Dracula, Crazy Vampire. This vampire gem was made by Planet Interactive Development and came to the Game Boy Color way back in 2001. This game was actually licensed by Universal Studios, the iconic film studio that brought us monster classics like The Wolfman, Frankenstein, and of course, Dracula. With a top-down perspective, you take control of Count Dracula. The first level takes place in Transylvania, where Dracula's castle is under attack by members of the church and their leader, the Grand Inquisitor. As Dracula, you must search your castle for special ingredients needed to create a potion that will give Dracula the power to endure the sunlight. To defend yourself from the Holy Crusade invading your castle, Dracula can shoot vampire bat projectiles that will destroy his enemies on contact. Taking damage from any enemies or staying in the sunlight for too long will eventually drain your health meter. But, being a vampire, you have the ability to drain your enemy's blood and replenish your own health, although the game refers to this act as draining your victim's energy, not blood. After finishing the first level, you must then travel to different locations around the world, where you will attempt to recruit other vampires to join your quest in your fight against the Grand Inquisitor. Each maze-like level is full of different enemies that you must either avoid or defeat, all while solving simple puzzles and finding specific key items. As per usual, you must defeat a stage boss at the end of each level. Now, I played this game a lot when I was a kid, so nostalgia is probably affecting my opinion, but I definitely recommend checking out Dracula Crazy Vampire. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a fun, competent action game. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy is worth $26. Next on the list, we have Roswell Conspiracies, Aliens, Myths, and Legends. This action horror game was developed by Crawfish Interactive and came to the Game Boy Color in 2001. Roswell Conspiracies is based on the animated TV series of the same name. The show's premise was that aliens have been living among humans for ages and were the origins of many of the creatures humans know from myth, folklore, and legends, such as vampires, witches, and werewolves. You play as protagonist Nick Logan, a former bounty hunter that now works for a secret government agency that hunts down aliens around the world who are masquerading as humans. The first level takes place in London, England. There have been sightings of werewolves, as well as several attacks on humans. As Nick Logan, you must roam the streets of London and expose any aliens who are posing as humans. The aliens will begin to attack you once they've been found out, and transform into large, wolf-like creatures. You must then fight them off with your weapon, and when you've got them to a weakened state, attempt to capture them. The gameplay has an over-the-head point of view, and 10 levels in total. The rest of the game has a similar theme, where you travel around the world, capturing dangerous aliens that have been mistaken for mythic monsters. For a Game Boy Color game, the graphics are quite nice, and the gameplay features plenty of action, as well as some missions that require you to drive a vehicle. I had a fun time playing this one. There's a constant element of suspense as you never know which people are actually aliens. Pick up Roswell Conspiracies for the low price of only $14.81. Up next we have a classic. Welcome to The Simpsons, Night of the Living Treehouse of Horror. In 1990, The Simpsons had just begun their second season. The third episode was called The Treehouse of Horror and was the first in what would become an ongoing tradition of yearly Halloween episodes. These beloved classics were anthology horror stories and were often parodies of famous horror movies. In 2001, Night of the Living Treehouse of Horror was released for the Game Boy Color. It was created by a developer called Software Creations and is based on the Treehouse of Horror Halloween episodes. The game has 7 unique levels where you get the chance to play as different members of the Simpsons family. In the first level, you play as Bart and must navigate your way through the Bad Dream House. The first level is a bit of a scavenger hunt, as you need to find different items around the house to gain access to the attic where Santa's little helper has been trapped. Other levels include one where you're Maggie, buzzing around as a little fly, Marge as she fights her way through a horde of zombies, and then there's Lisa's level, where you must sneak your way past your cannibalistic teachers and free your fellow classmates who have been captured. Homer gets 3 levels. In one, you play as a robot created by Mr. Burns as you attempt to get your body back. In one of my favorite levels, you get to play as King Homer in a level that feels very similar to the action game Rampage. There's also a vampire level where you play as Homer and must hunt down vampire Mr. Burns. With so many unique levels, there really is a lot to sink your teeth into in this classic. But I must admit, it's not an easy game. Many have been critical on how difficult it is, and the clunky controls don't do you any favors. Although this game isn't perfect, I still have a fun time playing it, as it's very nostalgic. I grew up watching The Simpsons, and I always especially loved the Treehouse of Horror episodes. For anyone interested, a loose copy of the Simpsons classic is worth $20.58 on PriceCharting.com. Next on the list, we have a point-and-click classic. Get ready to return to Castle Shadowgate. Shadowgate was a black and white point-and-click adventure game originally released for the Macintosh PC. In 1989, a version of Shadowgate was released on the NES. 10 years later, the NES version made its way to the Game Boy Color. There were of course a few changes. Some of the sprites and colors were upgraded, and the point-and-click interface was modified to fit on the small screen of the Game Boy Color. It was renamed Shadowgate Classic. But other than a few changes, this port is almost the exact same as the version on the NES. You play as a warrior king who has entered Castle Shadowgate to stop an evil warlock who plans on summoning a behemoth from hell. As you explore Castle Shadowgate, you must solve numerous puzzles and find hidden items. Making the wrong decision, or failing to solve certain puzzles, can result in instant death, and trust me, this will happen a lot. At times, it can be tedious, but when you die, you restart in the last room that you were in, before losing your life. So, at least you're not starting from scratch, whenever you make a mistake. If you were a fan of Shadowgate on the NES, then the version on the Game Boy Color is almost definitely worth checking out. This is a great little game to play on the go, or if you're on a long boring trip. Pick up this point-and-click horror classic for only $10. Up next, we have yet another game based on a classic cartoon show. Get ready to play ScoobyDoo, Classic Creep Capers. ScoobyDoo fans saw the release of Classic Creep Capers for the N64 in the year 2000. A year later, a version was released on the Game Boy Color. Although both titles had the same name, they were very different games. The N64 version was developed by Terraglyph Interactive Studios and was a 3D action game, whereas the Game Boy Color version is a mysterious point-and-click adventure. The story follows Scooby-Doo and the gang as they investigate a jewel thief who has committed numerous robberies. Witnesses claim the thief looked terrifying, so the media have nicknamed him the Ghost. The game is based on an actual Scooby-Doo TV episode that aired back in 1970, called Nowhere to Hide. The title Nowhere to Hide is a clever play on words, as one of the main characters in the story is none other than Dr. Jekyll's son, who after a lab accident fears he may be blacking out and transforming into the Ghost and committing these robberies. With a point-and-click interface, you must investigate Hyde Mansion. At any point, you have the ability to switch between each character. Point-and-click games always feel kinda weird when not playing with the mouse. But in this case, the developers made a fairly competent user interface that doesn't make the game feel too clunky to play. Scooby-Doo Classic Creep Capers is another game that I would highly recommend to both the horror fan and the casual gamer. If you're a Scooby-Doo fan though, this is an absolute must-play. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy only goes for $9. For that price, you can't go wrong. Next up, we have Ghosts and Goblins. Way back in 1985, Capcom brought us the beloved classic, Ghosts and Goblins. It was a huge hit at the arcades, and would eventually receive a port to the NES. Due to its massive popularity, Capcom created numerous sequels and spin-offs, and while all these new games were good in their own right, the general consensus was that the original was still one of the best. In the year 2000, thanks to a developer called Digital Eclipse, we were finally able to play Ghosts and Goblins on our Game Boy Color. The graphics from the NES version weren't directly ported over. Instead, they were recreated to take advantage of the Game Boy Color's more powerful hardware. The music and sound effects aren't quite as good as in the original NES version, but the GBC port still gets the job done, and the audio is more than adequate. Personally, my favorite improvement is that the GBC version features a password system. Ghosts and Goblins is not an easy game. The addition of a password system greatly improves your chances of beating the entire game. Even still, this is not an easy feat. Now, I'd like to recommend this game because it really is cool and I had a fun time playing it, but currently a loose copy on Pricecharting.com is worth a whopping $93. Unless you're a diehard collector, that is a lot of money to spend on a loose Game Boy cartridge. There's plenty of other ways to play this game, so I wouldn't recommend spending that kind of cash, but if you're ever in a thrift store and see this on the GBC for a cheap price, definitely pick it up. Up next, we have another game based on a vampire movie masterpiece. Let's play Blade. Two years after the movie's release, Blade came to the PS1 and eventually the Game Boy Color. The PS1 version was developed by a company called Hammerhead, while the version on the Game Boy Color was made by a developer called HAL Laboratories. As Blade, you visit different locations throughout the city and battle different groups of blood-sucking vampires. The gameplay in Blade is quite unique. Each level includes a shooting gallery stage where Blade remains in the center of the screen, shooting at targets all around him. Other gameplay that each level features are classic side-scrolling beat-em-up sections. During these parts, you simply move from floor to floor, dispatching any enemies that get in your way. All you have are your fists and feet to defend yourself, but you also have weapons called glaives, silver boomerang-like weapons that fly around the room, decapitating any enemies on screen. They're quite useful. At the end of each level, you must then fight a stage boss. Once again, the gameplay vastly changes. The boss fights become one-on-one fighting matches, similar to something like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. These boss fights aren't easy, but you at least get to finally use Blade's iconic samurai sword. Blade ended up being a terrific game, and one that I had a lot of fun playing. The fact that each level was split up into 3 different sections really kept the gameplay interesting. On Pricecharting.com, a loose copy of Blade is worth $23. This is one that I would definitely recommend checking out. Okay, next on the list, we have the new Addams Family. This Game Boy Color game wasn't based on any of the movies or cartoons, like all previous Addams Family titles. Instead, the new Addams Family game was based on a late 90s sitcom of the same name. This live-action TV show only had 2 seasons on the air, but still had a combined total of an impressive 65 episodes. I fondly remember watching this show as a kid back on YTV. It was never as good as the movies or even the classic Addams Family, but it was still fun to watch. A company called Seventh Sense started developing the Game Boy Color game while the show was still on the air. However, it wouldn't be released until 2001, 2 years after the show was already canceled. With a point-and-click interface, you play as both Pugsley and Wednesday. The story follows the iconic family as they scramble to find the deed to their mansion. Recently, the bank had sold their land, as the city had discovered that there was no actual record of their family owning the property. To make matters worse, a large company has purchased their land and plans to build an amusement park. Now, the Addams family only has a few days to find proof of ownership, or they'll be evicted from their own home. Now, as Pugsley and Wednesday, you must help search the mansion, completing various puzzles and scavenger hunts in an attempt to find the deed to their property. Along the way, you'll have the chance to interact and talk to different characters from the show. Now, over the years, I've definitely played better Addams Family games, but I've also played worse. The new Addams Family is definitely unique. The point-and-click interface sets it apart from all the prior platforming entries. I probably wouldn't recommend this game to the casual gamer, as it's a bit slow, but if you're a fan of the Addams Family, you might enjoy it. For anyone interested, on PriceCharting.com, a loose copy is worth $21. Okay, up next, we have an obscure horror game that I can almost guarantee you haven't heard of. Welcome to Devil Island. Devil Island is an unlicensed GBC game that can be found on bootleg multicarts from China. Its actual name is Emo Dao, which translates loosely to Devil Land or Devil Island. Once you start the game, right off the bat, the overworld map and gameplay may look quite familiar. That's because the developers shamelessly ripped off the same style gameplay and map from the Famicom game Getsu Fumaden. The first town you find on Devil Island has a creepy old man that greets you. These small villages are scattered throughout the entire map and act as save points. Some villages instead have a shop owner where you can purchase items and different weapons. Despite the game having many similarities to Getsu Fumaden, when you reach the first castle, it quickly becomes apparent that the game's main inspiration was Castlevania. Your character even has a whip, just like the hunters from the Belmont clan. The gameplay is similar to Castlevania as well. You simply scroll from one side of the screen to the other and kill any enemies that get in your way. Throughout the game, you'll have to fight your way through all kinds of different monsters and ghouls. All the creatures that you'll encounter die quite easily, but they can be a bit of a problem as they tend to attack you while you're jumping. In fact, there's quite a few levels where you'll have to jump blindly and can't see the next platform, so you'll have to get good at attacking midair quite quickly. Each level features colorful backgrounds drenched in spooky imagery. The graphics actually look quite nice. I actually had a fun time playing this one. I wasn't expecting much, but it turned out to be a pretty solid platformer. Devil Island definitely proved that a Castlevania game should have been available on the GBC. It's kind of baffling that Konami never released one, as it would have been a welcome addition to the Game Boy Color library. I highly recommend checking out Devil Island. If you're a fan of Castlevania, it's an absolute must-play. For anyone interested, you can import multicarts from China, or download the ROM onto your PC. Okay, up next, we have Aliens, Thanatos Encounter. Aliens, Thanatos Encounter is a sci-fi shooter that came to the Game Boy Color way back in 2001. It is based on the iconic Aliens franchise of the same name. The game was created by British developer Crawfish Interactive, but was mainly subcontracted out to an Australian company called Wicked Witch Software. The game takes place aboard Thanatos, an abandoned freighter ship that has become infested with xenomorphs. There's 5 different Marines available as playable characters. Each Marine has different stats and abilities. Some can wield 2 weapons at once, while others can equip both a weapon and a motion tracker. If your character dies, you must then carry on as a different Marine. But if you're quick, you're actually given a few minutes to find and save your previous character. The game is played from a top-down perspective and features 12 levels. You start off with only a handgun, but throughout the game you'll have access to all the staple weapons of the Aliens franchise, including pulse rifles, flamethrowers, and grenade launchers. Aliens Thanatos Encounter has some pros and cons. The graphics are great and the gameplay is very competent, but unfortunately the aliens can be a bit annoying. The enemy sprites have horrible AI and tend to rapidly dart around the screen, which can be a bit tedious. Sometimes the facehuggers will latch onto your head as well, and it can be a pain in the butt to shake them off. All in all, Aliens Thanatos Encounter is, in my opinion, only an okay game. In many ways, it reminded me of the NES classic Alien Syndrome, although Alien Syndrome had a weird retro charm to it, and was overall just a better game. I really can't recommend Alien Thanatos Encounter because I didn't like it, but if you're a diehard fan of the Aliens franchise, it might be worth a play. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy is worth $26. Okay, up next, we have Baby Felix, Halloween. This 2D platformer was developed by a company called Bit Managers, and is based on the Baby Felix and Friends TV show. It was released in December of 2001, but was only available in PAL regions, which I always found weird, as Felix the Cat is a popular cartoon character in North America, not Europe. Anyway, the story follows Baby Felix and his friend Kitty Cat. While on their way to a Halloween party, the pair get separated from their friends and become lost, They enter an old house to ask for directions, but as soon as they're inside, an eerie voice informs them that the house is haunted and has trapped their other friends as well. Now, it's up to the feline duo to rescue their friends and escape the haunted house. You have the option to play as both Felix or Kitty Cat. Both Felix and Kitty Cat play almost the exact same. You have a melee attack that you can charge up, and you also have the power to fire projectiles. Your goal is to simply get through each linear level and rescue Felix's friends. At the end of each level, you must then defeat a stage boss. There's 5 levels in total, each with a different theme. Now this platforming gem isn't really a horror game per se. If I'm being honest, really it belongs on a list of Halloween games. But after beating the first boss, I decided to include it. I mean, look at this witch. She is terrifying. The other reason I included Baby Felix Halloween is I really do think both horror fans and the casual gamer will have a fun time playing it. Baby Felix Halloween is a fun, competent platformer and an absolute must-play for anyone that loves the Game Boy Color. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy is worth $35.17. Next on the list, we have the comic book classic, Spawn. Spawn is an action horror platformer that was developed by Konami and came to the GBC way back in 1999. You play as the iconic anti-hero Spawn and must battle your way through 7 levels where you'll fight criminals, demons, and even angels. When you start a new game, you'll have the option to choose one of 4 levels. 3 of these levels are just side-scrolling beat-em-up missions, while one takes place on the highway, where Spawn must battle his enemies while trying to escape on his motorcycle. If you're playing the game on easy mode, you'll only have access to these initial 4 stages, but playing on normal or hard mode will allow you to play the last 3 levels and unlock the true ending. Throughout the game, you'll find random gun pickups, but your main form of defense are your melee attacks. If you hold the attack button down and charge it up, Spawn will use his demonic power, and a chain will spring from his chest and strike any enemies in close proximity. Spawn's demonic chain is super effective and makes dispatching enemies very easy, but it does come at a cost, as using it will quickly drain your health meter.
Hey, ugly, looking for something? Who are you? What do you want? Me? Just call me Clown. And I want nothing. But you might want to call an ambulance.
Each level has a mini-boss midway and a stage boss at the end. Each of these boss fights starts with a cutscene that features voice acting alongside the text.
Hold it, hell scum! I won't allow you to contaminate all that is pure and good.
I never claimed to be good or evil.
You have no choice. Prepare to meet your dark master.
The audio during these cutscenes is a bit rough, but considering it's on a Game Boy and when it was made, it's actually pretty impressive.
Welcome to hell, Spawn. I told you we'd meet again. Remember me? No, should I? You're stupid and you look don't want any part of this. I just want my wife. But it's not going to happen. Once I'm done with you, you'll wish you were never reborn.
Now this game isn't perfect, but I have to admit, I had a fun time playing it. Some of the levels do get a bit repetitive, but the story and dialogue make it all worth it. If you're a fan of the Spawn franchise, then this is an absolute must-play game. It's not cheap though. On pricecharting.com, a loose copy is worth $47. Okay, next on the list, we have a Japanese game called Hunter x Hunter. Hunter x Hunter is an adventure platformer based on an anime of the same name. It was developed by a company called ITL and was released in 2001, but sadly never left Japan. Now I'll be honest, I've never actually watched the anime that this game is based on. And the entire game is in Japanese, so I really don't know what's going on. But I can tell you, it's a pretty fun game to play. I think the best way to describe Hunter x Hunter is a combination of Castlevania and Zelda 2. You have stats that you can level up, and there's certain areas that you can't access until you've acquired certain abilities. As you play through the game, all of your enemies are reminiscent of creatures from the Castlevania series. You'll fight zombies, skeletons, and of course, flying bats. Now, I didn't make it too far in this game, but apparently you get the chance to play as other characters from the anime as well, which is a cool bonus. In fact, this whole game is pretty cool, and I had a fun time playing it, but the language barrier can be a bit of a problem. But for the most part, you should be able to play the whole game despite not understanding most of the text dialogue. I think most people would enjoy this game if they gave it a chance, but if you're a fan of the manga or the original anime, it's probably a must-play. Now, pricecharting.com didn't have any sales data available, so I can't give an accurate price of a loose cartridge, but on eBay, they're on sale for around $50 plus shipping. Up next, we have a game called Yaku. This is an interactive horror novel developed by Athena and released only in Japan. It first came out on the Super Famicom, but eventually made its way to the GBC. Similar to other Japanese sound novels, the player reads a story as text appears on screen. The story follows a cruise ship named Diana and its captain and crew as they embark on an ill-fated journey. Throughout the game, you will need to solve puzzles as well as make decisions that can affect the outcome. Unfortunately, as you can see, this game is nearly impossible to play unless you can read Japanese. For that reason, I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you're a die-hard horror collector. Now, there was no sales data available online, but recently, a copy sold on eBay for $84. If anyone is fluent in Japanese and has played this game on the GBC or the Super Famicom, please let me know in the comments below what the game's about and if it's any good. I'm quite curious and would really love to know how it turns out. And unfortunately, there really isn't much available online explaining the game or the backstory. Okay, up next, we are playing Little Nikki. Little Nicky is a platforming game based upon the Adam Sandler movie of the same name. It was developed by a company called Digital Eclipse and came to the Game Boy Color in the year 2000. As you can see, the game starts off with a raunchy cutscene, straight from the movie. A peeping Tom is spying on a woman getting undressed. But before we can see the goods, he has a fatal accident, and soon finds himself waking up in hell. Although very funny, this was a pretty mature scene from the film, and I was kind of shocked that it made its way into a Game Boy game. But it was a funny scene, and definitely a nice touch. It helped to set the mood for the rest of the game. Now, before we go any further, let me preface by saying I know that Little Nicky isn't really a horror movie or a horror game, but it does have some mature themes, and it does involve demons, the devil, and many parts of the game do take place in hell, so I decided to include it in my list. Anyway, the story follows Adam Sandler's character, Little Nicky, who was one of the 3 sons of the devil. When Satan decides he doesn't want to abdicate his throne and let one of his sons rule, Little Nicky's older brothers decide to leave hell and head to Earth. Their plan is to rule mankind as demonic kings. Now, it's up to Little Nicky to ascend hell and search for his older brothers on Earth and bring them home no matter what. Little Nicky features a total of 19 levels. 5 of the stages are minigames, while the other 14 are platforming levels. The first thing you'll notice when you start playing is how incredibly slow Nicky is when he's moving around. But rest assured, this is all part of one of the game's main mechanics. Little Nicky is a creature of hell, and he likes the heat. Whenever you find fire, Nicky can charge up in the flames. After being fully charged up, you'll discover that Nicky can suddenly move around very quickly, but the speed doesn't last for very long. In fact, most of the levels revolve around Nicky charging up his speed so he can make it past difficult platforming sections that he otherwise wouldn't be able to. Now, the platforming levels are a lot of fun, but the mini-games scattered throughout really make the game interesting. They're definitely a great bonus. I really thought Little Nicky would be kind of a crappy game, but it was surprisingly very good. It had competent gameplay and fun minigames. I'd highly recommend checking this one out. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy of Little Nicky is worth $21. Up next, we have a port of a classic, Towers, Lord Bandiff's Deceit. This first-person dungeon crawler was developed by JV Enterprises and was first released for the Atari ST way back in 1993. 7 years later, Towers, Lord Bandiff's Deceit would receive a port to the Game Boy Color. The story follows 4 adventurers, whose ship is damaged during a storm. The crew manages to reach an oceanside town called Lamini, also known as the Land of Towers. While their ship is being repaired, the mayor of the town sends the adventurers to Lord Bandiff's tower. No one has seen or heard from Lord Bandiff in nearly a month. However, after entering the tower, the entrance collapses, trapping the group inside. When you begin a new game, you have 4 different characters to choose from, each with different stats and abilities. The first-person interface works well with the GBC D-pad. As on the original for the Atari ST, you can only move forward, back, left, and right. As you explore the dungeon, you will encounter numerous enemies, both man and monster. Combat is basically just mashing the attack button, and enemies can take a while to defeat, which can make the battles quite tedious. When you defeat an enemy, they'll often leave an item behind that you can pick up. You'll also find various items and weapons scattered throughout the rooms in the dungeons. Aside from finding items like keys to open doors, you'll also have to solve puzzles. And this, sadly, is where the game kind of falls apart. To use, pick up, or select items, you must first push the select button, which will bring up a cursor that you must move around using the D-pad. This is another slow, tedious process that will make you want to reach for the power switch. In the end, I wasn't a big fan of this game. Towers does have some redeeming qualities though. The short yet impressive full motion videos are a sight to see, and not something that you'd expect on a Game Boy Color. The game also features link cable support for 2 players, which is definitely a cool bonus. I can't really recommend this game, but fans of the original might appreciate it. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy is worth $14. Up next, we have a horror mystery game that was developed by Carmelo Electronics. This horror game graced the Game Boy Color in 2021. Pine Creek is one of many new games in recent years created using the Game Boy Studio. The quiet town of Pine Creek has been shaken to its core after the disappearance of a young girl. The residents of Pine Creek believe that a satanic cult is behind the girl's disappearance. But really, no one knows for sure. You take control of the protagonist, a young boy named Atso, and must attempt to uncover the mystery of your friend's disappearance. With a story akin to the cult classic Twin Peaks and graphics almost identical to Pokemon, Pine Creek is a story-driven murder mystery with plenty to sink your teeth into. But don't let the cute graphics fool you. Pine Creek features scenes of violence, blood, and adult themes. This game is definitely not for kids. I had an exceptional time playing Pine Creek. I think that both horror fans and casual gamers will both enjoy this one. If you're interested, you can order a CIB copy from incubategames.com. However, if you don't have a Game Boy, you can also purchase the ROM and download it to your PC and play it using a Game Boy emulator. Once again, I can't recommend this one enough. If you're a horror fan, it's an absolute must-play. Next up, we have Dracula, Dark Reign. Dracula Dark Reign is another new GBC title made using the Game Boy Studio. Developed by Spacebar Interactive, Dark Reign is special as it's the first Dracula game made under the Stokerverse license. The Stokerverse was co-created by the great-great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, the very man who created the iconic Bloodsucker. Because Dark Reign was made under the Stokerverse license, the developers were able to use more themes and elements from the original novel, including a never-before-seen prologue for the original novel that was found in Bram Stoker's own personal notes. You play as protagonist Jonathan Harker as he attempts to escape from Count Dracula's castle. As you can see, the gameplay is very similar to modern 2D Castlevania games, and features non-linear level progression similar to Metroidvania games of the past. Now, the gameplay that you're seeing right now is actually just a demo, as Dark Reign won't be released until sometime in 2024. Once again, you'll have the option to order a physical copy or download a digital ROM from Incubate Games. I had a lot of fun playing this demo and would highly recommend checking out. For anyone interested, go to incubategames.com where they have a free version available for download. This next game is a dark fantasy platformer that was made by an indie developer called Elvies, and is a recent addition to the Game Boy Color library. Welcome to Nightmare, the Ninth King. The forgotten kingdom of Mortimer that disappeared centuries ago has suddenly reappeared, seemingly out of nowhere. And with the city's reemergence, the Call has also returned, an unknown force that draws certain individuals to the center of Mortimer. With the return of the kingdom, a young warrior has also reawoken. She has no memory of her past life. All she knows is her name, Arwen. She too feels the call, and without knowing why, knows she must journey to the center of the city and put a stop to it. Nightmare has heavy influences from Castlevania and H.P. Lovecraft. The developer clearly has a love of side-scrolling retro horror games. The atmosphere is both dark and gothic. The dreadful level design are the perfect backdrop for a 2D horror experience. Nightmare features 2 playable characters that have different weapons and abilities. They also have different campaigns, bosses, and their own unique endings. Nightmare the Ninth King ended up being a delightful addition to the Game Boy Color library. It's a must-play for fans of 2D horror games. You can order a complete in-box copy from YastunaGames.com, or you can buy the ROM from itch.io and download it to your PC. Next on the list, we have a game called Life's Too Short, A Christmas Spirit. Back in 2022, gamers were treated to the release of a unique handheld console called the Playdate. This awesome device was created by a company called Panic. The Playdate featured an interface very similar to the Game Boy. It also had a unique hand crank on the side that could be used for certain games. The Playdate was a hub for indie developers around the world to upload their games to. It could also be used to create your own homebrew games. One of the many games available on the Playdate was a cute adventure game called Life's Too Short. This Playdate classic was a hit, and was eventually ported to the original Game Boy. In Life's Too Short, you take on the role of a little ghost who's been given the task to repair the romantic rift between 2 vampires who have fallen out of love and have confined themselves to their respective coffins. Recently, the sequel, Life's Too Short, A Christmas Spirit, was released for the Game Boy Color. Once again, you take on the role of a celestial problem solver, as you've been called back to the vampire's mansion. This time, the Count and Countess have sought your services regarding their son, Vlad. Due to Vlad's bad behavior at school, Vlad has made his way onto Santa's naughty list. Vlad's parents don't want their baby son to miss a visit from Santa, and hope with your help to get him off Santa's naughty list by Christmas Eve. As the little ghost, you'll need to explore the mansion, solve numerous puzzles, and help various spooky characters in order to ensure that baby Vlad's first Christmas isn't ruined. Once again, you can order a complete in-box copy from YastunaGames.com or visit itch.io and download the ROM onto your PC. Next on the list, we have an indie game called The Fallen Crown. The Fallen Crown was created by an indie developer called Atavis Games. The story follows an undead warrior who was awoken from his eternal slumber with no memory of his past life. Without knowing why, the nameless warrior finds himself being drawn towards an ancient monolith, known only as the Tower. After an unfortunate accident, our undead protagonist loses his body and finds himself trapped in the bowels of the unholy tower. Now, as only a skull, you must recover your body, as well as the memories of your long-forgotten past. Although this game is still in development, the playable demo currently available showcases stunning graphics, competent gameplay, and a dark fantasy story rich with comedy and horror. The final release date has not been announced yet, but The Fallen Crown will be another GBC homebrew that will be playable on the PC or on an actual Game Boy Color console. Head to itch.io to download the free demo and support the creator. This is one that I had a lot of fun playing and that I would highly recommend checking out. I can't wait to play the full game. Okay, up next, we have another homebrew. Welcome to Ghostly Labyrinth. Ghostly Labyrinth came out in 2020 and was developed by Jared Shanson. This is another game that was made using the Game Boy Studio. The story follows an amateur caver named Kashona, who, after a sudden cave-in, finds herself trapped inside of a cavern. Now, you must explore the massive cave system and attempt to find an exit. As you navigate the maze-like cavern, you will be attacked by ghostly specters that haunt the cave. You can dispatch these ghosts by shining your flashlight in their direction. But be careful, your flashlight only has so much battery life, so it's best to ration its use whenever possible. As you explore the cave, players will quickly learn that there are numerous dead ends, and finding yourself trapped after traversing a long tunnel can be frustrating, but the game rewards players for exploration with item pickups. In fact, many of these dead ends contain pickups such as batteries for your flashlight or precious gems that you can collect. I had a great time playing this spooky platformer. Ghostly Labyrinth is a homebrew that I would highly recommend. There's also a sequel that recently came out, Ghostly Labyrinth 2. The follow-up is very similar to the first game, but features various upgrades, detailed cutscenes, and, in my opinion, is overall a more polished game. Ghostly Labyrinth 1 did have a physical version available upon release, but to my knowledge, there's no longer any in stock. But you can download the digital version of both Ghostly Labyrinth 1 and 2 from itch.io. Up next, we have a disturbing horror game called Rot. In 2018, an independent horror film was released called Rot: Silent Hill. This short masterpiece was written and directed by Adrian Picardi and starred Jordan Matlock and Catherine Pagova. Clocking in at only 9 minutes long, the story follows a man who, after experiencing a tragic accident, finds himself trapped between worlds.
You alright? No. It's okay. It's okay. I'm not trying to hurt you.
Throughout the film, it's insinuated that the location of this nightmare is none other than the infamous town of Silent Hill. This Game Boy Color adaptation was developed by Grave Repercussions, but the full game is still a work in progress. This demo version, Wrought Vertical Slice, was an entry for the 2023 Scareverse Jam, a competition where developers could submit indie horror games. The game starts off with a first-person, point-and-click interface, where you must gather your possessions and exit your car. You then take control of the protagonist and must navigate your way through the seemingly empty city. This is another game definitely not for kids. There's graphic violence and scenes of blood and gore, and the overall vibe is very unnerving. As you attempt to seek medical help, you will find yourself blacking out and waking up back in your car. As this happens, you receive cryptic phone calls from an unknown caller. Eventually, you will be attacked by a madman wielding a gun. This epic battle shows the game's competent battle system and makes me all the more excited for the game's full release. I had a lot of fun with this demo and would highly recommend checking it out. For anyone interested, head over to itch.io to download the free demo. Up next, we have Lethal Rush. This endless runner was created by Elvies, the same developer that brought us Nightmare, the Ninth King. This gory minigame is a fan-made remake of Dead by Daylight. You play as the slasher Blight. and must slaughter as many people as possible, all the while avoiding pitfalls and other obstacles. Like all endless runners, your goal is to simply keep running and acquire a high score. I had a great time playing this one. Lethal Rush is a simple, well-done endless runner that both horror fans and casual gamers will enjoy. Download the free ROM from itch.io. Up next, we have an odd game called Throwing Hands. This creepy minigame was developed by Grave Repercussions and is another short but awesome homebrew developed using the Game Boy Studio. Throwing Hands is a weird but fun Halloween-based minigame that is quick and simple to play. Horror fans especially will appreciate the disturbing intro video and the unnerving vibe. Personally, I would love to see this game expanded on. I had a lot of fun. Download this horror gem for free at itch.io. Okay, these next three games are all Castlevania-inspired fan games. They can all be downloaded for free from itch.io. The first game is called Castlevania: Memoirs of the Abyss Divine. This demo was a submission to the 2022 Lost Cartridge Jam, a contest where programmers could enter and develop a fake tech demo of a fictional piece of long-lost media. The idea here was that Memoirs of the Abyss Divine was a Castlevania game for the Game Boy Color where development had started, but the game was cancelled and never released. This Castlevania tech demo was programmed by Chris Maltby. It's certainly an interesting look at what a Castlevania game may have looked like on the Game Boy Color. The next game on our list was made by Ryan Markham and is a tech demo of what Castlevania Circle of the Moon may have looked like if it was ever ported to the Game Boy Color. As you can see, the graphics look great, and the gameplay is quick and competent. This was always one of my favorite games on the Game Boy Advance. and apparently it would have been awesome on the Game Boy Color as well. This is another short demo, but once again showcases the power of the Game Boy Color. I would love for this programmer to create a full game, or at least a few more levels. And lastly, we have Nosferatu's Revenge. This retro Castlevania clone was developed by BitGen Games. Once again, you take on the role of a hero as you attempt to rescue a loved one. Only this time, instead of Dracula being the villain, you're up against the iconic vampire known as Nosferatu. Unlike the other two tech demos that we looked at earlier, Nosferatu's Revenge is a complete game and features several stages along with numerous enemies and boss fights. Nosferatu's Revenge ended up being a fun little game. This is one that I would highly recommend, especially if you're a big fan of Castlevania games. Okay, next up, we have Feed the Monster. This unique puzzle platformer was created by a developer called Zyph and was specifically made for the Game Boy Color. The story follows an alien who has crash-landed on Earth. Part of his ship was found by a horrible monster who eats humans. In order to recover the parts of his ship that the monster has, Koru has been blackmailed into capturing humans and bringing them back for the monster to devour. Each level sees the player taking control of Koru, as you must first locate your space gun, and then capture a human being. Once you have your prisoner, you must then navigate your way back and feed the hideous monster. Feed the Monster ended up being a fun and massively addicting game. Now this is just a demo version, but the developers are working on a full game that will feature new levels, enemies, and new mechanics to make each stage different and unique. I had a lot of fun with this one. It's a must-play for fans of the GBC. For anyone interested, download the free demo from itch.io. Up next, we have another Game Boy Color homebrew called Ghost of the Arcade. This hidden gem was created by a developer called HTML5 and was originally a submission to the 2023 GB Combo Jam. Ghost of the Arcade was specifically made to run on the GBC and features numerous color palettes and stunning anime-inspired graphics. The story follows a child who goes by Monster Boy. This is his unfortunate nickname, as he and his family all have large horns growing from their heads. Because he's different, our protagonist has always been a target for bullies. At the start of the game, Monster Boy tragically loses his life when two bullies accidentally kill him. The game's dark story and dark sense of humor quickly becomes apparent, as Monster Boy's murderer barely suffers any consequences for his actions. The bully's only punishment is being banned from the arcade for a week. Even the arcade owner who witnessed the murder is very cavalier. He seems more annoyed that he now has a body to clean up than the fact that an innocent child was just killed in his place of business. It's later revealed that the arcade owner has special goggles that allow him to see and communicate with spirits. Monster Boy has just discovered that not only is he dead, but he's unable to leave the arcade. The owner enlightens him that Monster Boy is now trapped in the arcade and cursed to haunt it until he deals with his unfinished business. But the owner quickly points out that there's far worse places to be trapped than the arcade. He then gives Monster Boy an unlimited supply of coins. He then suggests attempting to beat the bully's arcade high scores, as perhaps this would help with Monster Boy's unfinished business. Monster Boy's newfound mission to beat his bully's high scores is reinforced when he meets the goddess of gamers. This celestial being informs Monster Boy that she can bring him back to life, but only if he beats the high scores of every game in the arcade. With Monster Boy's newfound mission, you then spend the rest of the game simply attempting to beat the high scores of Monster Boy's bullies. Throughout the game, you'll have the chance to play as a demon, a cursed mummy, a sea monster, a monster truck, and a mercenary who hunts aliens in space. There's also 32 monster figurines that can be collected with points won from beating high scores. Now, Ghost of the Arcade definitely isn't scary. It's another title on the list that isn't a true horror game by any means, but the story really is quite sad, and it's full of dark undertones, so I decided to include it. I had a great time playing this one, and honestly, I can't recommend it enough. Download this Game Boy Color gem free of charge from itch.io. Next up, we're playing Trouble City Pocket Mission. This homebrew came out back in 2021 and was developed by Sky Pirate Studios. The story follows Special Investigator Jack Mission, who has been sent to a seemingly abandoned toy factory called Paradise Co. to investigate the disappearance of several FBI agents. With a classic top-down view, you must explore the dilapidated toy factory and uncover the truth behind the strange and ominous Paradise Co. As you explore the abandoned toy factory, you'll meet and interact with strange and eccentric characters, and have to battle evil, sentient toy robots and deadly creatures made of slime. I ended up having an awesome time playing Trouble City. Don't let the cute graphics fool you. This is a legit survival horror game with classic survival horror tropes, such as puzzles, item management, and problem solving. Trouble City is a super fun game and an absolute must-play for horror fans. Download the game for free from itch.io. Next up, we have another horror homebrew called Days Without. Days Without is yet another great horror experience from indie developer Elvies. It was originally a submission to the 2023 Game Boy Showdown Jam. The game starts off with our protagonist waking up and heading to the store to buy some food. But Job soon realizes that something is very wrong in his building. The rest of the game sees Job attempting to make it out of his building alive and reunite with his neighbors who have held up in a gas station. The gameplay and graphics are simple yet very effective. This is 2D survival horror done right. I had a great time playing this one, and this is a homebrew that I would highly recommend checking out. Download a free copy from itch.io. Okay, horror fans, the list is almost over. But before we look at the top 3 games, here are some other worthwhile mentions that I think most horror fans will appreciate. Welcome back, horror fans. The third last game on our list is from arguably the biggest horror franchise of all time. Let's play Resident Evil Gaiden. This 2001 action horror classic was made by British developer M4. The plot follows a zombie outbreak on a cruise ship called the Starlight and features characters Barry Burton and fan favorite Leon S. Kennedy. Despite it being a game endorsed and published by Capcom, Resident Evil Gaiden is considered non-canon, as its plot is contradicted by the main series in key parts. As mentioned earlier, the main protagonists are Leon and Barry, who now work for a secret, unnamed organization whose mission is to put an end to the global operations of the sinister company Umbrella. Leon was sent to the cruise ship the Starlight as it was recently discovered that a new bioorganic weapon, or BOW for short, had recently escaped from an Umbrella laboratory and had made its way onto the cruise ship and is now masquerading as a human, hiding in plain sight. After Leon was sent to investigate, he then stopped all communications. After 24 hours of radio silence, former STARS member Barry Burton was sent to find Leon and attempt to locate and destroy the BOW. When you find items such as ammo or health pickups, an item icon will flash on the screen alerting you. Other items can also be found by searching rooms and killing specific enemies and searching their bodies. With a simple top-down view, you take control of Barry Burton. As you explore the cruise ship and search for answers, you will have frequent contact with your headquarters. These cutscenes are similar to the radio briefings in Resident Evil 4. During these briefings, you will be given tutorials, hints, as well as the outline of your mission. Throughout the ship, you will come across and have to battle a ton of zombies. The combat is actually quite unique. When you encounter a single zombie or a group, the game changes to a first-person interface. A set of crosshairs will bounce back and forth across the screen, with a small target somewhere in the middle. You must shoot your weapon as the crosshairs intersect with the target. The closer you are to the middle dictates the amount of damage inflicted upon the zombie. Now, this combat mechanic is quite unique and very clever, and it's definitely fun, but only in small amounts. After a while, these battles become very tedious. In fact, ammunition throughout the game is very scarce, so it's better to avoid zombies at all costs. The problem is that some of these zombies have key items needed to unlock certain areas that will progress the game and the story. This means that it's almost easier to just kill every zombie in the game, as they may have an important item or key hidden on their body. For this reason, I'd recommend using a walkthrough, especially if you're serious about beating the entire game. That way, you can avoid the undead whenever possible, but also make sure to dispatch any zombies carrying anything important. At different points of the game, you will also have a chance to play as both Leon and a little girl named Lucia, who seems to share a psychic connection with the BOW on board and can sense when it's near. All in all, Resident Evil Gaiden is actually a pretty damn good game. It had mixed reviews when it first came out, and it's not perfect, but Resident Evil Gaiden is an absolute must-play for horror fans, and especially fans of the series. It may be the black sheep of the franchise, but I'd still highly recommend it. It's not cheap though. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy is worth $185. The second last game on our list is none other than a port of the original Resident Evil. Now, this game was never released and is technically only about 90% finished. But despite these setbacks, I think most would agree that this version is still an absolute masterpiece. During the late 90s, Capcom hired British developer HotGen Studios to create a Game Boy Color version of Resident Evil. The release date was scheduled for October of 1999. HotGen Studios were extremely ambitious. Their mission was to make it as close to the original as possible, and for the most part, they succeeded. Capcom, however, wasn't happy with the outcome. After HotGen Studios failed to meet the delayed release date of January of 1999, Capcom canceled the project. This was extremely unfortunate, as HotGen Studios were nearly finished and were allegedly planning to have the game ready for release in March of 2000. But Capcom, for some reason, was unhappy with what HotGen Studios had worked so hard to create. The only question is why? I mean, what did Capcom expect exactly? We're talking about a 64-bit 3D game being ported to an 8-bit handheld device. Frankly, I'm shocked that they were even able to create what they did. But ultimately, Capcom went with British developer M4, who would give us Resident Evil Gaiden a year later. Eventually, the unfinished Game Boy port of Resident Evil was forgotten about, as it faded into obscurity. Until 2012, when an anonymous individual leaked the playable GBC-ROM online. Since then, homebrew enthusiasts have polished the unfinished ROM and even begun selling reproduction carts online. As mentioned earlier, only about 90% of the game is playable. I haven't played from start to finish, but from what I have played, this truly feels like the OG Resident Evil. You can play as both Chris or Jill. Most of the cutscenes, items, and rooms all appear to be present. There is, however, some obvious glitches. There's no point in picking up ammo, as both weapons available, the handgun and shotgun, have unlimited ammo. Also, when you kill a zombie, they simply fall to their knees and stop moving. Although, if you leave the room and return, the dispatched zombies will no longer be there. If you went through the entire game with a fine-tooth comb, I'm sure you'd be able to find many more bugs and glitches. But, despite all these imperfections, I still had a great time playing it. It truly is a shame that Capcom cancelled this port. This was a true blue survival horror experience, and in my opinion, would have been a massive hit had it been released. I can't help but wonder what Resident Evil on the GBC would have been like had the developers had more time to finish and polish the game. But I guess we'll never know. Despite being an unfinished game, I would still highly recommend checking it out, especially if you're a big fan of the first Resident Evil. For those interested, you can download the ROM and play on your PC, or you can buy reproduction cartridges online. Quite a few sellers have them, so they're not hard to find at a good price. Once again, we have saved the best for last. Next up we have Alone in the Dark, the New Nightmare. This survival horror classic is the fourth game in the Alone in the Dark series, and in 2001 was released across multiple platforms, including the PC, the Dreamcast, and the PS1. While the home console versions were made by a developer called Darkworks, the Game Boy Color port was created by a different company called Pocket Studios. While most developers would abandon the attempt to recreate a 3D game on a handheld system, Pocket Studios made the ambitious decision to create a handheld port that was as close to the home console version as possible. While the full motion cutscenes had to be removed, and many other large parts of the game couldn't be recreated, Pocket Studios were still able to create a Game Boy Color game that possessed impressive pre-rendered backgrounds with your 3D character rendered over them. The plot follows survival horror veteran Edward Carnaby, who's been hired by a university professor named Dr. Eileen Cedric to track down a missing artifact. But Carnaby's main reason for accepting the case is that the previous private eye who had been hired had recently been found dead. His name was Charles Fisk, and he also happened to be an old friend of Carnaby's. Carnaby and Eileen fly to Shadow Island to begin their investigation. In the home console version, you have the option to play as either Eileen or Carnaby. However, in the Game Boy Color port, you can only play as the latter. As Carnaby, you must explore Shadow Island and Morton Mansion and attempt to locate the missing artifact that you've been hired to find, and figure out who killed your friend and colleague, Charles Fisk. Another big difference from the home console version is the combat interface. The Game Boy Color wasn't powerful enough to render 3D enemy sprites over the pre-rendered backgrounds, so instead, combat occurs at preset points in the game, where the interface changes to an over-the-top view where you must battle groups of monsters. These combat segments are tedious and clunky, and are easily the worst part of the game. Despite the combat being quite lackluster, the rest of the game does provide some fun moments. Most of the game consists of simply exploring your surroundings and finding key items needed to carry on the story. Items such as ammo or health pickups are displayed as easy to see icons that you can't miss. Other important items, such as keys, will usually twinkle or sparkle and tend to stand out from the pre-rendered backgrounds. The eerie story, stunning graphics, and creepy atmosphere make for a truly compelling playthrough. While I tend to like and favor the Resident Evil Game Boy port more, that is still ultimately an unfinished and unreleased game. So I think in the end, Alone in the Dark: A New Nightmare deserves bragging rights for being the best survival horror game available on the Game Boy Color. I would highly recommend checking out this horror classic. Survival horror fans are guaranteed to have a good time. Casual gamers may not love it, but will surely at least appreciate what Pocket Studios were able to create on an 8-bit handheld system. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy is worth $28, but you can also play this game on the Switch through Nintendo's streaming service. Well, horror fans, that is the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching. It really means a lot to me. I hope everyone enjoyed learning about the large collection of horror games available on the GBC. If there's any that I missed, let me know in the comments below. Once again, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And I will see everyone in the next video.